Colin Fischer is about a 14-year-old boy with Asperger's syndrome on his very first day of high school. And on the very first day of high school, this other kid, Wayne Connolly, who has been tormenting him for the last 8 years, is accused of bringing a gun to school when a gun goes off in the cafeteria. Colin doesn't believe that Wayne is guilty of bringing the gun to school because there is frosting on the pistol grip of the gun. And Wayne is a very fastidious eater, and so Colin sets out to prove that Wayne is innocent of the crime, and along the way, spoiler, he ends up making a friend out of Wayne and helping Wayne to see exactly the kind of person that he's been for the last 8 years and give him an idea of the sort of person maybe he should be instead.
Ash and I are blessed in that we wrote probably 60, we wrote and produced probably 100 hours of television and or more, and several feature films before we ever started a novel. When
I started my career as a writer, and by that I mean when I was 3 years old, walking around dictating stories to my mother, I always had this idea in my head that I wanted to be a novelist. Here's what I discovered: I didn't have the discipline for it.
Colin Fischer actually started life as an idea for a TV show that Ash and I had, and as happens most of the time with us, it kind of started with a character and us thinking about this boy who was even more of an outsider than the rest of us feel.
Writing a novel requires a tremendous amount of discipline, and so I thought then I would write short stories. Discovered that the bottom fell out of the short story market somewhere in the middle of the 19th century.
Why write a character with Asperger's syndrome? Well, on one level, we are writing what we know, either from the inside or from close observation of having close family members with who are on the autistic spectrum.
Or writing partners. When I discovered screenwriting, it was great because screenwriting had a very specific structure, it had a very specific process, and all of those things helped to make up for what I felt was my lack of discipline.
And in an almost Star Trek-like way, and where Gene Roddenberry would have a non-human character like Spock or Data observing humanity from this very rational perspective and kind of seeing our foibles a little bit from the outside. While Colin is very, very human, he has that similar outsider's perspective on high school life and family and society in general.
We actually met on the internet back when it was cans and string and everything was in black and white. We were on Usenet and we were writing about Star Trek, which is our favorite show of all time. And we were in the middle of what was then called a flame war, and it was pretty awful. I mean, people were actually killed. It was pretty bad, but we were on the same side. I got an email from Zack saying, "Ashley, you rule the universe." I said to myself, this Zack Stentz guy is clearly pretty observant and smart. I should talk to him. So we started emailing back and forth, started communicating. We both realized that we had aspirations to be screenwriters. We showed each other our writing. We discovered we had very similar voices, very similar sensibility. We decided to start collaborating.
How we generally work, and this was kind of shaped by the fact that we wrote 2.5 screenplays together before ever meeting, is that we outline together, and we outline in generally pretty close, pretty great detail, and then we split the project up. We split Colin up chapter by chapter, in some cases section by section, and we each wrote sections, and then we passed them back and forth and rewrote each other, made the voices harmonize, and eventually got a finished product from it.
I think the virtue of Colin feeling like he's an alien is that it's easy for almost anyone to pick up that book and project themselves into the world of that book and into that story and identify with the main character, because you can't pin him down and say, oh, he's a teenage boy, oh, he's a X, he's a Y, he's a Z. He's just Colin.
An interesting thing that happened when we were writing Colin is that while it was always important for us to make the parent characters and the adult characters very fleshed out and three-dimensional, when we started Colin thinking about it as a TV show back in the mid-2000s, I only had one kid, and Ash wasn't a parent yet. And it felt much more like we were in the headspace of Colin and Wayne, the other protagonist. And it felt like as we went along and as we got closer to completion, and Ash was a dad, and I suddenly found myself with 3 kids, that at least I found myself empathizing more and more with the trials and tribulations of what the adults and what the parents were going through. So it was an interesting perspective in looking at the story from both the perspective of the kids and the perspective of the adults.
When we sat down and we started working on Colin and writing that novel, it was literally a dream come true. It was a feeling of things coming full circle, and feeling like I had actually learned something.
We kind of wrote Colin mostly in 2 big bursts. One, the first big burst was during the writer's strike of 2007, where we were sidelined and technically not allowed to be working on screenplays during that time. And then we wrote several chapters of it. We let it lie fallow as things like X-Men and Thor got in the way, and then came back to it and finished it in another burst about 1.5 years later. And we were lucky enough to sell it shortly after. And we've been editing and honing and working on the cover and all of those things since then. And as we're doing this interview, we're about a month out from the book coming out. I would say Colin Fischer is pretty unapologetically a mystery story, but like our favorite mystery stories that we grew up reading, it uses the mystery format to talk about bigger things than that, to talk about being an outsider, to talk about bullying, to talk about friendship, to talk about family, and to talk about growing up. So it falls pretty squarely within the YA mystery category, but goes down some pretty interesting roads while telling that mystery.